The smoke rose like a furious monster against the bright morning sky, twisting and clawing upward as if desperate for breath. The countryside was peaceful just moments before, but now the world seemed to tremble with the sound of metal groaning, flames crackling, and two terrified little voices crying for help. At the edge of an empty road, a car lay smashed against an old oak tree, fire swallowing it inch by inch. And sprinting across the field, with dirt on his boots and panic in his chest, was a humble mechanic named Jareth Cole, who had no idea that the moment he chose to run toward danger would change the rest of his life. Folded hands. If you believe in kindness, bravery, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to RW Insights to support stories that inspire. Jareth had been working in the small shed on his farm, fixing an old tractor engine that kept stalling. He lived alone on the outskirts of Williford, surrounded by rolling fields and the silence he'd grown used to after losing his family years ago. Life had become routine, simple, repetitive, quiet. But fate often arrives without warning, and as he wiped sweat from his forehead, a loud explosion shattered the stillness. He looked up and saw the thick smoke rising beyond the hill. Without hesitating, he grabbed his old fire extinguisher, slid into his truck, and sped toward the commotion. When he reached the scene, he heard them, two small, trembling voices crying inside the burning vehicle. The heat was unbearable, the flames loud enough to drown out his pounding heart, but Jareth didn't stop. He smashed the back window using a rusty wrench he carried everywhere. Smoke burst out like a wave, stinging his eyes, but he pushed his arm inside and blindly reached for the children. His hand brushed against tiny fingers, and with a surge of fear and determination, he pulled out the first girl, a child with golden braids and soot-covered cheeks. He placed her safely on the grass before turning back for her twin sister. The fire had intensified, threatening to collapse the car's frame. Jareth could barely breathe, coughing violently as he crawled halfway into the burning shell. He felt the second child's small body curled in the back seat, frozen in fear. Her hair had caught a spark, and he smothered it with his own jacket before lifting her into his arms. The moment he turned to leave, the front of the car exploded, rocking the ground and throwing hot debris across the road. Jareth shielded the girl with his body, taking the brunt of the impact on his back. But he kept moving, one staggering step after another, until he finally reached safety beside her sibling. The girls cried into his chest, trembling and coughing, while he sat there gasping for breath, smoke swirling around them like the fading shadow of death. When the firefighters and police arrived, they were stunned. One officer shook his head in disbelief as he stared at Jareth's burned forearms and ash-covered face. "You shouldn't have survived that," he said quietly. But Jareth merely answered, voice weak, "They're safe. That's what matters." He went home that evening exhausted, his body aching and burned but his heart strangely full, the kind of fullness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't expect thanks, rewards, or recognition. In fact, he assumed he'd wake up the next day to the same quiet, lonely farm. But dawn had other plans. The sun had just begun to rise when a distant rumble echoed across the fields. Jareth stepped out of his farmhouse, squinting at the sky. One helicopter, then two, then five. Within minutes, the sky above his farm was buzzing with massive rescue helicopters bearing emergency insignias, followed by several news choppers and even private ones. They descended like a swarm of giants, sending dust spiraling as they landed across his fields. Jareth shielded his eyes, confused, overwhelmed, unsure what was happening. Then the doors opened. Out stepped reporters, paramedics, officials, and behind them, two women holding the twin girls he'd saved. The girls broke free the moment they saw him and ran across the grass, throwing their small arms around his legs. Their mother, Ravenna Hale, rushed after them, tears pouring down her face. She fell to her knees, taking Jareth's hands in hers, trembling uncontrollably. She was no ordinary woman, he recognized her now. Ravenna Hale was a world-famous philanthropist and business figure whose family name was known almost everywhere. The children he had saved were the Hale twins, Amira and Alina, beloved worldwide. Ravenna tried to speak, but her voice broke, and she clung to his hands like someone holding on to hope. The officials surrounding her explained that the entire world had heard about the mysterious mechanic who dove into a burning car with nothing but courage and stubborn hope. They had come not to glorify themselves but to honor him. Jareth felt overwhelmed as Ravenna stepped aside to reveal a group of men carrying cases, documents, and equipment. One official announced that Ravenna had purchased brand new machinery for his farm, donated millions to rebuild his workshop, and arranged lifelong medical care for him. Another said she had established a scholarship fund in his name for underprivileged children. Ravenna herself placed a hand on Jareth's shoulder and whispered that none of this could repay what he had done for her daughters, but it was her attempt to return a fraction of the kindness he'd shown. He felt tears burn behind his tired eyes. For the first time in many years, he didn't hold them back. As the helicopters prepared to leave and Ravenna embraced him softly, Jareth realized something. He had spent so many years believing his life was meant to be quiet and small. But one act of courage, one moment of choosing love over fear, had pulled him into a future far brighter than he imagined. And as the twins held tightly to his hands, smiling up at him with the innocence only children can give, Jareth understood that sometimes, miracles don't fall from the sky, they come from the fire we're brave enough to walk through. Yellow Heart, if this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to RW Insights. Your support helps these emotional stories reach more people. Sparkle's special request: comment Bravery lives if you believe heroic actions still exist in this world.